Hi, this is Brad Linder with Liliputing, and this is the Samsung ATIV Book 9 Lite. It's a thin and light laptop from Samsung that, as you might guess from the 9 Lite name, is not quite as powerful as the 9 Plus. It's got a plastic case instead of metal, it's got a low-power AMD processor instead of an Intel chip, but it's still relatively sleek. It's well under an inch thick, weighs about 3.5 pounds, gets 5 to 6 hours of battery life, and offers decent performance for day-to-day tasks. It's not exactly a speed demon when you run benchmarks, but it'll get the job done. You can see it's got USB 3.0, HDMI, and Ethernet, although you need special adapters because of this thin case. There's a SD card slot here. The other side we've got another USB port, headset jack, I believe that's a display port, and a lock port. Because of the thin and light design, it's sort of a unibody here. There are some screws here. I'm not really sure what would happen. This is a review unit if you undid those screws, but it's not really meant to have the battery or hard drive or other things replaced. While it's made of plastic, it's relatively sturdy, feels pretty good, and it's got a sort of fake brushed aluminum look on the back of it. Keyboard and touchpad are pretty great. It's a nice wide touchpad with good tactile response. Keyboard's very similar to what you would get on the higher end models. And it also has a touchscreen display, which is pretty responsive. It's a 1366 by 768 pixel display, which works pretty nicely. It's glossy. Some of the earlier Samsung models with this design had matte displays. That's something that's pretty difficult to do in this situation because the touchscreen, nobody's really figured out how to do a good matte touchscreen as far as I'm aware. But you can see, you know, in terms of sort of general responsiveness, it works pretty well. Now you can also see the screen wobbles a bit as you poke at it. That's kind of unfortunate, but to be honest, it's the sort of thing where I find myself not really using the touchscreen very often when it's on a desk like this. I'm using it much more often when this is sitting on my lap, and it's just as natural to reach up and touch the touchscreen as it would be to reach down and use the keyboard and mouse. Something that really sets this apart from a lot of notebooks is that the screen actually folds back 180 degrees. It's not exactly an IdeaPad Yoga or something that folds back 360 degrees, but if for some reason you found yourself wanting to use a notebook in kind of a more of a tablet kind of way, you could do that here, I guess. So at 3.5 pounds, it's thin, light, but not quite as thin and light as some of the other models. This is an older Samsung laptop that weighs 2.5 pounds. It's a Samsung Series 9 I picked up about a year ago. Has a very similar design, but it's thinner, it's lighter, it has a metal case, and a faster Intel Sandy Bridge processor. Even though this model has a Sandy Bridge chip, it's significantly faster than what you get out of the new ATIV Book 9, which has a custom AMD processor that's similar to an AMD Temash chip. It's an AMD A4 kind of level processor. It's a quad-core chip, but and it has AMD Radeon HD graphics, so it handles 1080p video playback just fine, but it's, in terms of sort of raw CPU power, it's really not very powerful. Now what you do have here is a 128 gigabyte solid-state drive. When you add the solid-state drive to, I believe, 4 gigs of RAM, and a 64-bit processor, quad-core processor. Overall, in terms of sort of day-to-day performance, it works pretty nicely. I find that I don't have a lot of problem surfing the web with multiple browser tabs open, a dozen tabs or more, listening to music, watching videos, doing basic tasks. Even some light gaming, because of those graphics, should work pretty well. But at the same time, it's not exactly a speed demon, so if you want to do really CPU-intensive tasks like transcoding video to H.264, I found that this thing's about on par with what you would expect from, say, an older Intel Atom processor. So, nothing to write home about there. But in terms of multitasking, in terms of regular tasks like web browsing, light gaming, media playback, works really well, and I think that's what probably a lot of people are going to look for in this sort of device. Shouldn't have problems editing documents, other things. It's really just like heavy CPU tasks that are going to be a problem. Now, something else that Samsung's really been pushing with its latest PCs is sort of how they work as part of an ecosystem. So you'll notice here, painted right onto the case, it says Side Sync and Home Sync. And Side Sync is an application that lets you pair your Samsung computer with a Samsung phone. So I'm going to fire up a Galaxy S3 here, start the Samsung Side Sync application. And if all goes according to plan, and it doesn't always, there we go. In my available devices, it shows that we're now connected. So I'm going to turn on keyboard and mouse sharing, and when I drag my mouse cursor now all the way over to the edge of the screen, it shows up on the phone screen. So let's show that again. So say I want to switch apps. Let's go over here. Let's open the web browser. Already have my favorite web page visited, but let's pick another one. So you can see here I'm typing on the computer and entering commands on the phone. So that's a pretty nifty value-added feature. It's the sort of thing that right now just sort of seems like a party trick the way I'm doing it, but say your phone is sitting next to your computer and you wanted to look up a phone number or do something else, and you don't want to grab the phone and unlock it and do all of the other things. Actually, I think it might need to be unlocked for this to start in the first place. Now you can basically just use your keyboard and mouse to control what's happening on the phone. Now, theoretically, SideSync also supports another action which lets you use phone screen sharing, and this should work over Wi-Fi or USB. I found that the phone screen sharing just doesn't ever seem to work for me. Attempting Wi-Fi connection, we'll see what happens here. Theoretically, it's supposed to show this screen on this screen. I've been having problems getting that to work, and I've read some experiences that other people have had saying that the software might be a little bit buggy at times. It also was not entirely intuitive to set up. I was sent this Samsung Galaxy S3 specifically so that I could use SideSync, and I found that the app wasn't pre-installed. In fact, the Samsung App Store wasn't even pre-installed, so I had to download and install the App Store, download and install SideSync, and then sort of go through all of this to get it to work properly. So when it works, it's actually pretty neat, and I can see this being a useful feature for Samsung users who have Samsung phones, Samsung laptops, and sort of want to be part of the Samsung ecosystem. In terms of sort of overall practicality right now, I'm not entirely convinced that it's super practical, but it's kind of a neat little feature. And again, Samsung seems to be pushing it. They're putting the name of the feature right here on the case. So, anyways, that's a quick look at the Samsung ATIV Book 9 Lite. Overall, I think it's a pretty nice laptop. It has some decent performance. Despite the fact that it doesn't score real well on synthetic benchmarks, or not even synthetic, just in terms of sort of raw CPU power computing, it doesn't do real well. But in terms of day-to-day performance, it's just fine for editing documents. I've used it as my primary device for updating the website for full days at a time, and it feels almost as fast as any other laptop that I would use for that sort of activity. So for web browsing, editing images, etc., should be fine. It's just when it comes to really raw computational tasks that this might not necessarily be the best machine. That said, I think the biggest problem is the $800 starting price. I think that there are a lot of thin and light portable notebooks with touchscreen displays these days and Windows 8 software which sell for less than $800. And I think that maybe after this one's been on the market a little bit longer and the prices start to fall, it'll be a worthwhile buy. But at $800, it's a little bit difficult to recommend unless you're really looking for Samsung's style and a Samsung laptop that works with your Samsung phone and so forth. And if you're in that ecosystem, which I think Samsung would really like you to be, then the ATIV Book 9 Lite is a relatively inexpensive way to get some of the features that you would get with an ATIV Book 9 Plus or an older Series 9 notebook. Personally, I'm still planning on sticking with my old Sandy Bridge model. for another year or two, because it does still offer significantly better performance. But I'm starting to notice that it doesn't have a touchscreen. The more time I spend with touchscreen notebooks, the more I find it actually to be useful. I don't do a lot of these Metro style full screen applications, but just when you're using the web browser and other things, I find that sometimes when you're sitting with this on your lap, it's easy to just navigate with your fingers instead of with your fingers. Anyways, this is Brad Linder and the Samsung ATIV Book 9 Lite. You can find more details at Liliputing.com.